Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. This week we have a great guest, longtime medical marijuana icon up in Washington State, the founder of Lifevine, a patient organization who's out with a new book. We'll be talking about a couple of his books. Martinez, we'll have him on after our Hemp News segment. So stay tuned as we bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight is from right here in the USA. Law enforcement officials made well over 250,000 arrests for marijuana-related violations in 2022, according to data compiled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Crime Data Explorer. According to the online database, which was updated last week with data for the year 2022, police made at least 227,108 arrests for marijuana violations last year. Of those, 92% were possession only. This totals a slight uptick from 2001 when the FBI reported a total of 219,000 marijuana arrests. However, these totals are underestimates because a significant percentage of law enforcement agencies still fail to report their data to the FBI. For the year 2022, 83% of the agencies, representing 75% of the total U.S. population, reported their data, up from only 63% of the agencies in 2021. Therefore, it's unclear whether the year-to-year uptick in reported marijuana possession arrests is due to changes in police tactics or due to more agencies reporting, or both. Adding to this confusion in some instances, the raw data provided by the agency in its downloaded zip files is inconsistent with the data published elsewhere on its website. In all, some 30% of all reported drug-related arrests in 2022 were for cannabis. Marijuana arrests peaked in the United States in 2007 when police made over 870,000 marijuana-related arrests. At that time, just under half, or 48%, of all drug-related arrests in the United States were for marijuana-related violations. While there has clearly been a long-term decline in the total number of marijuana-related arrests nationwide, it's still discouraging that there still remains a significant gap in the available information. At a time when voters and their elected officials nationwide are reevaluating state and federal marijuana policies, it's inconceivable that government agencies are unable to produce more explicit data on the estimated cost and scope of marijuana prohibition in America. Nonetheless, even from this incomplete data set, it remains clear that marijuana seizures and prosecutions remain a primary driver of the drug war enforcement complex in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of Americans continue to be arrested annually for these violations, even though a majority of voters no longer believe that the responsible use of marijuana by adults should be a crime. Since 2012, 23 states and the District of Columbia have legalized adult use marijuana possession. Voters in Ohio will decide on similar marijuana legalization measure this November. A majority of voters from almost every demographic in Ohio support passing Issue 2, a citizens-initiated measure to legalize and regulate the possession, home cultivation, and retail sale of cannabis for those aged 21 or older, according to statewide polling data released last week by the Baldwin-Wallace University. Overall, 57% of registered voters support the measure. The poll's findings are consistent with those of prior surveys showing that almost 60% of Ohioans endorse adult use legalization. Because the proposed measure is a statutory question rather than a constitutional amendment, state lawmakers have options of amending its provisions if it's eventually approved by the voters. Last week, members of the GOP, Republican-led Ohio Senate passed a resolution urging voters to reject the initiative. Voters will decide on the measure November 7th. Early voting in Ohio has already begun. If passed, Ohio will be the 24th state to legalize the adult use marijuana market and the 14th to do so by a public vote. Additional information about Issue 2 initiative in Ohio is available from the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. Our last story tonight is from Tel Aviv, Israel. The sustained use of pharmaceutical-grade cannabis products is associated with significant reductions in pain, depression, and opioid use among elderly patients, according to data published in the journal Biomedicines. Israeli investigators assessed self-reported outcomes in a cohort of 119 elderly patients with a mean age of 79 years who are prescribed medical cannabis products. Israel law permits qualified patients to access state-regulated cannabis products, and an estimated 100,000 Israelis are currently authorized to use them. The researchers concluded, quote, cannabis contributes to the amelioration of depressive symptoms while also achieving discernible pain alleviation. Our findings also demonstrate the relatively favorable safety profile of cannabis therapy in an elderly patient population, end quote. This study, medical cannabis is not associated with a decrease in activities of daily living in older adults, appears in this month's edition of the medical journal, Biomedicines. That's the end of our hemp news segment tonight. And so I want to urge you, if you or a loved one are looking for help finding a medical marijuana physician, we have physicians available all over the country. We'll be happy to refer you. Give us a call at 503-235-4606. It's 503-235-4606. Thanks for watching and help us restore hemp. Good night. Hi, I would like to welcome Martin Martinez in the show. How are you doing, Martin?
I'm good. How are you, Paul?
Very well. Martin is a iconic, if I dare say, medical marijuana patient here in the Northwest, up in Washington State. You founded Lifevine, is that right?
That's right. Long time ago.
Tell us about founding Lifevine. Let's start there. And I have to mention as well, you got a new book out. I've been reading it. It's really good. It's called A Flower Rises. There it is. A Flower Rises. Looks good. It's even turned the right way. So how and when did you found Lifevine?
Well, I was arrested in 1996 for growing marijuana in my home, medical marijuana.
And that was before Washington's medical marijuana law went into effect. I think Washington's marijuana law, did it pass in 98 or 2000?
The Medical Use Act of 1998 was sort of an extension of the same principles I used in 1996, the medical necessity law. And the medical necessity law is rooted in old English law from the last century. So it's basically a big part of our current law that we do have the right to this medicine if our needs outweigh the drawbacks of the legal system, and that has to be proven in court. And that same principle was applied to all patients in Washington in 1998.
I see. So tell us more about your bust in 96. They came into your house. How did that happen, and how did that go down?
Well, unfortunately, a good friend of mine became a heroin addict, and he got arrested, and he snitched on me. He told them about my garden, which I shouldn't have shared with him. He was a friend of mine. Well, so we got to watch out for those hard drugs. They can make people do terrible things.
That's true. You are a medical marijuana patient. You want to tell our audience how you qualify for medical marijuana and how it helps your condition?
Well, I was hit by a car in 1996. In 1986, excuse me. And in 1996, I was arrested for growing marijuana. Then my story is long and involved, and I've written the most important points in my book, A Flower Rises. I had found cannabis to be far superior to opiates. The opiates just drag you down. And no wonder, they told me I would never get out of the bed again, and they never get out of a wheelchair. And with the amount of drugs they were giving me, it's no wonder I could barely get my head off the pillow, let alone walk. But by reducing opiates, replacing with cannabis, over the years, I found a much better, healthier way of dealing with the injuries from, it was a motorcycle crash. A car ran into me on a motorcycle. So it's an interesting story, and I've had a lot of nerve damage to my voice, as you could tell, and my eyes, and I've had a lot of surgeries to correct this. Opiates are no good for neurological pain. They're actually depress the nervous system and makes it difficult to function for someone like myself. But cannabis, on the other hand, as I'm sure you know, is a neuroprotective. It's a compound that bonds to nerve cells and strengthens them.
Yeah.
I was told I would never use my right arm again because I have nerve damage. cannabis helped to trigger regeneration. It is it's miraculous compared to other medicines on the shelf.
Hmm. It really is. I have a collection of antique medical marijuana containers, and many of them from Park Davis, Eli Lilly, even Johnson and Johnson. They say that it's for people who are habituates of opiates, chloroform. Apparently, chloroform used to be a problem.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, Cocaine, and for alcoholic delirium tremens. So doctors actually prescribed marijuana up until the 1930s to help people get off of those other drugs.
I heard that about even 1/3 of all medicines that were sold at that time contained at least some cannabis.
Yeah, yeah. I have a number of mixtures. Some of them are pure cannabis. Some of them are neurological concoctions with a lot of different things in it. And so they mixed it in with a number of other compounds as well. So uh, once you got arrested, is that what prompted you to start the Lifevine organization?
Well, it was a couple of years of my legal battle went on to almost to the vote for the Medical Use Act of '98. So it was a major campaign. My arrest and my trials and the initiative were synchronistic in that, they both happened during the same period. So I was at the center of all that, and my case was in the public eye. And then we had the law passed in '98, but as you may know, it provided no way for patients to obtain the medicine. We had been involved with the Green Cross, which was a loose medical marijuana organization, and there were hundreds and thousands of patients who had notes scribbled on napkins and whatever by doctors who didn't really want to recommend, but they knew it was in their patient's best interest. So we had a lot of loose recommendations, and all that had to be codified into the state approved recommendation forms, and it became an ordeal actually because patients were needing the medicine and doctors were still being harassed by the federal government in particular. And the state jurisdictions often took a dim view of this whole movement. And so there was a tremendous amount of conflict. And I created Lifeline as just a group of patients helping patients, not like the California dispensaries. All of the California dispensaries traditionally have been run by non-patients for a profit. And Lifeline is the opposite. It's patients helping patients, nonprofit. We're just trying to all have the medicine we need, and people work together. Everyone can do something because, as you know, the cultivating medical cannabis is a very involved process, labor intensive, and so a lot of people can contribute to the process, and it does not have the heavy expense that is commonly applied in other dispensaries.
What I tell people is that to be able to give someone, say, a cannabis extract to a patient, there's literally 1,000 steps you go to before you hand them the extract. You've got to find where you're going to grow. You've got to get your equipment and supplies together. You've got to find the genetics. You've got to plant the genetics. You've got to fertilize them and take care of them. And it's literally 1,000 different steps before you get to that
At
end.
least, and they have to be done correctly too.
That's right. And you want it to be done organically, ideally.
Absolutely.
But you don't have cannabis will concentrate impurities. So one thing they say hemp does is it draws heavy metals and toxins out of the soil. So it's used as a remedial crop in a number of places on toxic soil to clean the soil. Well, the problem with that is if you're using it medicinally, it's going to pick up anything that's in the soil. And so you want it to be done organically.
Right. There was a study just this last summer about that, showing that marijuana users often have higher levels of cadmium and heavy metals because of that exact reason. And this is why we must have control of our own medicine for our health. We cannot rely on commercial products that may, whether intentionally or not, contain toxic synthetic ingredients.
Right. So tell me more about Lifevine and how once you started it, how it grew. I know you mentioned the Green Cross up in Seattle. That was Joanne McGee and Skip's Patients Helping Patient project. I know you worked with them too.
Yeah, we started out there because that's what there was. But Joanna got shut down. She didn't get arrested. She had the police serve her with a cease and desist order, largely because her group was being run out of her home and the neighbors complained. The traffic was too high. And Joanna did a lot of great political work and helped an awful lot of people. But we needed to take it to a better level where patients can come and go without any problems. So we originally started on First Hill, which is called Pill Hill in Seattle, near Swedish Hospital. And we had a huge amount of patients. The population exploded. By the year 2000, there were thousands of patients in the Lifeline network. And it was difficult because we had a lot of legal challenges. The collective principle was not in the law. It was not prohibited exactly, but of course, the authorities like to impose their own interpretations of the statutes. And so we had a lot of legal stress. There were a lot of patients being prosecuted at that time, up until 2004, actually. There was a tremendous war going on. I call it the war against the war, that we were on the march and we were in the courts and we were in the press, and the patients risked, personal problems with their landlords or their jobs, if they had a job, or their doctors, because the feds clamped down on a lot of institutions, and any medical establishment or housing establishment that took federal funds had a big oppression for the patients. We were prohibited. I have stories of, people in hospice who were denied medication and people who were kicked off from transplant lists and on and on. The trials and tribulations of medical marijuana patients at, during the early part of this millennium was very harsh in Washington. And, we pushed and we kept on, and I had a great website. We lobbied Olympia, the state Congress, and we found a great champion in Senator Jean Cole Wells, whose own secretary had cancer and used cannabis. So she saw it work firsthand, and she took up our cause. And we can't thank Senator Jean Cole Wells enough. She's now executive of King County, but she was at the time a state senator, and she helped progress legislation over many years, which evolved protections and limitations for medical marijuana patients.
Yeah, Jean Cole Wells was a Republican in a heavily Democratic area, but still she was very successful, both in, and I didn't realize she was King County executive now.
Yeah,
She's done a lot of good work, that's for sure.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
back in about 99, I was starting to help medical marijuana patients in Oregon. And I started having people show up from Washington State saying, help us find a doctor, help us find a doctor. So soon I opened up in Seattle and Bellevue and started helping a lot of patients. What a lot of people didn't know is Washington State's law did not have a state permit
it was just issued by the doctor, and it was considered an affirmative defense. An
That's
affirmative
right.
means you are arrested, and then you tell the court, I was doing this for medical purposes.
Right.
Well,
That is the
throughout Washington State, there was this learning curve that happened. The bigger the city was, the faster they would go through it. The smaller rural areas, it took years. The forfeiture laws, which Ronald Reagan first implemented, just corrupted police nationwide, and they started searching for assets. And that became the main base of many of their drug prosecutions. And
yes.
so we saw, I went and opened clinics in different states, but I found that I was going and testifying as the custodian of medical records in Washington State more than all the other states combined in these affirmative defense trials. In
Right.
one case out in the Tri-Cities in Pasco and Franklin County, there was a fellow there, probably about 80. He had 2 marijuana plants in his yard. The police prosecuted him for about 3 years, and I went in and testified 5 times on behalf of his case before they finally threw it out and didn't convict him. But just over 2 little marijuana plants. What we saw here in Oregon is the police would search. If they thought you were growing marijuana, the first thing they would look at is the title to your house. And they'd want to know how much equity you had in your house, because that's what they were going to go after. And that corruption of police is one of the worst aspects of drug prohibition. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have testified for dozens of patients in criminal and civil proceedings, and it's terribly alarming, the powers that were happening at that time in particular, where, as you say, people who were obviously solely working on personal use, grows, were prosecuted and their property was threatened. Their livelihood or their whole life would be turned upside down.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize about the forfeiture laws is that they are not part of the criminal process. It's a separate civil process. So once someone had their property forfeited or they initiated the forfeiture action, the patient only had 2 or 3 weeks to reply to that, or they would lose their property. And so many times that was the basis for law enforcement going after, one person as opposed to another.
Right. Well, I'm glad that's not as much of a problem now.
Well, now in Washington State, they still have the doctor's authorization is an affirmative defense. But with recreational marijuana, they have what's called a recognition card. And so once you have the physician's authorization, there's about 200 medical dispensaries in Washington. Not all dispensaries have that medical certification.
Right.
But then a patient is supposed to take their doctor's authorization form to one of these medical dispensaries, pay a fee. The state fee is $1. Some dispensaries do it for free. Then they'll make you a little card. Some of them charge $5, $10, or even $20. But the state fee is just $1.
Right.
That's much better than we have in Oregon. In Oregon, we have an outrageous fee that's $200 for a patient. And if you have several qualifiers, it can drop down. If you have supplemental security income from the feds, if you have SNAP, also known as food stamps, if you have the Oregon Health Plan, or if you're a military veteran, your fee comes down. But it's still prohibitive, especially if you don't have one of those qualifying discounts in Oregon. So go ahead, Mark.
I know it's terrible that, the biggest lesson I learned when I was arrested, and I've learned it ever since, over and over, is that the war on marijuana is all about money. That's really what it's about. The authorities use their scientific research positions to justify this commercial endeavor of prosecution, as you're describing. And they don't just make money off of forfeiture, of course. They're also federally funded in many cases, in many states. Drug task forces are funded by the DEA, and they have their own agenda on controlling marijuana. And I think it's wrong. I know that hemp and cannabis has been cultivated for at least 10,000 years, and that we know of, and probably earlier, obviously. And it has been the medicine of necessity for all people on every continent.
Yeah.
So this
No.
is something that is a genetically evolved adaptation that we all have the endocannabinoid system, which is why cannabis works so remarkably as a medical substance, because it simply keys in your natural cannabinoid system. So, this is what is they're afraid of, I guess, is that they can't control the money. That if you're able to grow your own medicine, you don't need these hundreds of drugs that are on TV every night.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's it. It's about money, power, and economic control. There's no doubt. Uh, so the the law up in Washington has changed with the recreational, but still in Washington State, unlike Oregon and all but one other state that has recreational marijuana, you cannot grow your own. You have to have to grow in Washington State. You have to have a medical permit or a recreational permit and sell it through their systems. And so that's a big drawback because it's so expensive in Washington as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. Washington earned like $260 million in taxation in the first year that cannabis was legalized recreationally. And the taxation system for the recreational um, distribution is really excessive. And, you can't blame the states for needing the money, but it's a little bit overboard. Senator Colin Wells in 2008 took a good long look at my collective model, and she adopted it into the law. Excuse me. So the lifetime collective model became encoded in state law as a legal avenue for patients to get together and work together. Excuse me.
Okay.
Now, any collective of any size has to be registered with the state, and they actually have the right to come into your residence without a warrant to look at your garden. So this is not fair. Uh, no other medicine is treated this way.
Yeah, they in Washington State they've set up a collective garden, but it can have no more than 4 patients,
Right.
and so that limits it. Someone who's willing to have a cooperative, they have to jump through the collective garden hoop, and they maximize it at 4 patients. There aren't very many collective gardens in Washington State, and
No.
as in Oregon, the number of medical marijuana patients has dropped precipitously with the advent of adult use, also known as recreational
Right.
cannabis. I don't like the term recreational.
No.
To me, recreation is going swimming or hiking or playing a sport game. But if they talk about recreational alcohol use, that's binge drinking, right? So
Right.
it's not the same. It's treated, and it's radically different. You mentioned a while ago that all people have the endocannabinoid system. All mammals have the endocannabinoid system. It's something that our bodies develop to, and all mammals developed apparently to sustain homeostasis.
Right.
The the cannabinoid receptor runs retrograde or in the opposite direction of the regular neuron firing between the synapses of the nervous system, and it regulates all the other systems to promote balance, and also known as homeostasis.
Right.
And so it's
Even fish have cannabis receptors. How did that happen? I'm not
it's
sure.
it's something that the plant mimicked, and when
Uh,
humans discovered it at least 10,000, maybe 30,000 years ago, it's actually, I believe, the basis of agriculture, that
right.
humans started cultivating cannabis. So and then they settled down and started growing other crops. And I think cannabis helped domesticate other animals. I think that
Yeah.
chickens, pigs, no doubt horses, uh, came and were domesticated because we could give them cannabis as a food, the seed and the leaf, and
Mhm.
that helped in that regard.
Right.
All the main farm animals today were domesticated by civilizations that grew cannabis. And
Okay.
the old written texts, the Vedas in Central Asia, Southern Asia, India, and the oldest text in China, they both talk about cannabis as a medicine. So it goes back a long, long way until,
The Egyptians, Chinese, of course.
yeah,
It's only in a recent era that cannabis has not been central to civilization.
yeah, yeah. And we need it to be so again. We need to be able to cultivate hemp for fiber, for building materials, for clothing,
Right,
and solve so many problems. And plastic. Cannabis
right.
makes plastic. I have plastic utensils called hemp utensils here in my office. And then they have hemp wood that's harder than hickory and oak. We don't need to be deforesting the planet. It
Right.
makes the highest quality paper. I'm sure you know that from 1988, I started studying in China. By 1990, started importing container loads of hemp paper.
Right.
And I did that as a business up till 97.
Mm.
But because of that, I am invited to a number of hemp only events and get to see these innovations as they're happening, which is fantastic.
Yeah, well, it is becoming mainstream now, which is wonderful. Hemp is now getting the acclaim that it needs in
Yeah,
progressive circles, anyway. There's always this big war against the petrol industries. People think that cannabis and alcohol are at odds, but really it's the oil is the reason why it was prohibited, because of the hemp paper and because of the hemp
you,
plastic type materials. They're more durable and more economical and environmentally sound.
that's true. Back in 1994, I went to Kentucky and met with Gatewood Galbraith and Willie Nelson. And they drove a red Mercedes Benz station wagon from Lexington to the state capital, Frankfort, where they met with legislators. And this car was powered solely on marijuana seed oil. The
Hmm.
press, cold press the seeds. Then it drove on from the capital to Louisville, the largest city in Kentucky, and they had a concert to benefit Gatewood Galbraith. Gatewood was an attorney who was running for governor. He passed away back in January of 2012, but he had a wonderful phrase. Longtime viewers of this show have heard me say it, but anytime I get an opportunity, I usually do. The people who brought us marijuana prohibition are the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate, elite, fascist sons of a bitches. Now, in some audiences, I might not want to say fascist sons of a bitches. So I will instead use crony capitalist ruling class in that phrase. But I think Gatewood had it right, and I couldn't let that pass with him. So with the Lifevine organization, you want to tell us about its evolution? You started there in Washington State, and
well, Lifevine just grew out of the medical necessity of people who need the medicine, and it's very capital intensive. You need to pay rent or large floor space if it's indoors. Outdoors is still prohibited from view in Oregon also, and allegedly some people may tolerate a glance at a plant, but the police can make your life miserable just if people are aware that you have marijuana. So it's still a kind of hidden thing. Lifevine grew from the patient's need, and it was a tremendous ordeal to get the acceptance that we finally did. And at first, Lifevine was huge because so many people were just flocked to us. But it was too difficult and unwieldy, to try to grow cannabis for thousands of people is a tremendous process. So we branched out into collectives, smaller groups, and other groups arose during the years at the beginning of this millennium. And then, like I say, by 2008, Senator Cuomo's adopted the collective concept into legislation as a secondary option to the medical use industry that she tried to create in Washington, which would be modeled after California or even Oregon. In Colorado and Oregon adopted the existing medical systems into the mainstream at a certain point, whereas in Washington, the state really took control and prohibited large collectives by enabling this medical system. However, Governor Gregoire, once this bill was passed, was pressured by the White House, and before she signed it, she gutted it, basically removing all of the commercial medical dispensary statutes that Senator Cuomo's had created. And this created a terrible problem in the state because literally hundreds of organizations had already opened in anticipation of this law. So suddenly, all of these existing dispensaries were illegal, and everyone jumped on the collective bandwagon, and every dispensary became a collective. That was not pushed very far for about 5 years. And then there was backlash where dispensaries were given licenses to operate by local jurisdictions and then were closed down here in some cases. There were 350 medical dispensaries at the time that I call it general, not recreational, the general marijuana laws were passed for everyone. So these dispensaries were allowed to flourish for about 5 years under the guise of being collectives, but they were all shut down, and virtually no one in the original industry was allowed to get a license in the new recreational market. So I've got some, uh, I have some mixed feelings about the legalization process in Washington because I believe the patients have the right and the need to produce our own medicine. We need to be free of toxic compounds. When you smoke one joint or a pipe full a week at a party, that's very different than a chronic medical user who may consume concentrates, for instance, which may contain large amounts of contaminants. And we can't have that. When you're using the medicine for years, there's an accumulation of heavy metals and other toxins that can really aggravate your medical conditions. So we need to have control. We need to have freedom to produce the medicine that we need as nature intended.
Amen. I agree wholeheartedly,
I
of course.
know you do.
So the Lifeline is it's no longer in operation. Is that correct?
We're not the same as we were. Everyone is, it's much smaller. Everything has come apart. There's no longer a big Lifeline store or anything like that. We used to have many locations.
The
I'm still
overregulation
here.
of cannabis, this misregulation, they treat it like it's the most dangerous drug in the world when in fact it's just the opposite. It's one of the safest. No one's ever died from an overdose of cannabis. If you take too much, you're going to get loopy and go to sleep, and you'll wake up and you're better the next day or within 24 hours for sure. But the overregulation of cannabis is what's holding it back, and we know that the economic interests surrounding this are the ones who are lobbying to make that happen.
Absolutely. So the fight continues. It's just more complicated now.
Yeah, it's about freedom, really. I know you believe that as well. That we are freedom workers. I like to work rather than fight if I can help it. But we're working for freedom, and cannabis to me is a bellwether for the future of freedom. As long as they can overregulate and prohibit this innocuous, relatively harmless substance based on lies. Talk about fake news. I mean, this fake news about cannabis has been going on for 100 years now, and so it's just got a new terminology.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to, as an aside, you must know Ann Coulter, the Republican icon. She just this week, Ann Coulter said that abortion should be illegal for registered Republicans.
That's bizarre.
Well, she's making a sarcastic joke. If you don't want an abortion, don't have one.
You don't have to have it.
You don't have to use cannabis.
You don't have to. Nobody says you're forced to do it. Right. It's not like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and you have to take the soma that the government says you have to take,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, can't.
Watch those commercials on TV. Everywhere. The medical institutions are leading society into uncharted territory. You know that most of the drugs that are prescribed were developed in the last 10 or 20 years. And no one knows what happens if you take them for 20 or more years because no one ever has. Let alone all the drugs that are found to be harmful after the fact. And there's a lot wrong with our system. Cannabis can regulate our bodies in ways which the scientists are only just discovering all the benefits of. It is still an exciting, one of the most exciting fields of medical science is the cannabinoid system, which is totally separate from other pain relief or modulating systems in the body. And it's totally natural. Ways of improving the quality of life, with the whole plant and surely with some derivatives. But the synthetic drugs, which are just created, to make billions of dollars for the pharmaceutical industry, that's not about health, really. That's wrong. We need to.
Well, yeah, that's the problem, is that they're not thinking about health. They're thinking about how to get that blockbuster drug that can make their company billions of dollars, and it's about money, as you said. It's another one of my mentors, the late great physician Dr. Todd McArea, said that it is monomolecular mercantile madness,
Yes.
and I think that puts it probably best as well. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry is all about this monomolecular mercantile madness instead of health. Health is secondary, obviously.
Yes, Dr. McArea testified at my trial in 1996. He recommended to me in that time.
He passed from cancer, and at that time we did not know about full extract cannabis oil, also called Rick Simpson oil, and how it can cure cancer. But before he passed, he sold his practice to me down in the Bay Area in El Cerrito, California, and I ran his office for about a year before I sold it back to his sister, who said we got him a sweetheart deal.
Mhm.
And so, but it's just less responsibility for me. I think she's still down there operating that. But tell me about the genesis of your book, A Flower Rises. When did you start? There it
show
is.
it to you again.
And you can get that on Amazon and
Amazon.com.
site that we're going to run here as well, aflowerrises.com.
Right. There are a few little samples there. It's my memoir, as it were. It's actually a dramatization, you know. My previous books were purely scientific, factual, nonfiction. This book is also nonfiction, but it is dramatized. The names have been changed to protect everyone.
Yeah.
And but it's very much true to the whole story. My
What other
story and excuse me.
What other books do you have? Are they still in publication?
The new prescription is also available on Amazon.com. The new prescription marijuana as medicine, where I compiled scientific studies on medical cannabis. And there was not the plethora of resources then that there is now. The research was really just beginning in the 90s on the endocannabinoid system, and it continues still. It's hampered, of course, by these laws. The federal laws are continuing to inhibit the medical research to this day. And we're hopeful that the feds will make some changes, although
They keep to. They keep saying, "Hey, we're going to, change marijuana legalization." Probably one of the best bills ever, the MORE Act, to expunge records, passed the House of Representatives twice, but the Senate never took it up. And now the new Republican-controlled House is not going to take it up. I know 2 years ago, Chuck Schumer said it was going to pass in just a few weeks. But
I was
somehow,
in Washington, D.C. on 4/20 at the U.S. Capitol, and Chuck Schumer was, again, very confident that these bills were going to be passed, but we're still waiting.
I know, there's this event in New York City that spread around the world. It was initially called the Marijuana Legalization March, and then the Million Marijuana March, and now it's the Global Cannabis March. In New York City, we've had them here in Portland, but we haven't had them the past couple of years. Things have just changed so much. But in New York City, they're still doing it. And in 2013, I was the keynote speaker at the Global Cannabis March in New York. They also call it the New York Pot Parade.
Mm-hmm.
And the past couple of years, the keynote speaker has been my majority leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, senator from New York. So that's kind of a dramatic change there.
Yes, that's wonderful. COVID, unfortunately, was a part of the apparent death knell of HempFest. HempFest, which you were a major participant of, had a massive effect in Seattle. And it was the largest event in Seattle for years and years of all the events in that city. More people came to HempFest than any other for many years. But COVID is a part of why that doesn't happen anymore. My book contains many passages focused on HempFest also, because it was a major cultural and educational explosion that helped to transform Washington and the whole world, I believe, as an example. The Seattle HempFests were tremendous, hundreds of thousands of people protesting.
So it was my honor to participate. Our organization, THCF Medical Clinics, was the presenting sponsor for more than a decade.
Yes.
But also another problem was that it's in one of the most beautiful places you can imagine, a park, Myrtle Edwards Park on the waterfront of Seattle, just below the Space Needle and all of that. But Expedia set up their headquarters directly adjacent to it, and Expedia started to lobby against it. Expedia is part of Microsoft, and so Expedia had a lot to do with their fight for a permit. And there is a group of a new generation, so to speak, some of the old timers as well, that's working to organize another Seattle Hemp Fest for next year. So I sure hope to see it rise like a phoenix from its ashes.
I'll be there if it does.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I didn't know that about Expedia.
Yeah.
The corporate
Expedia,
structure is the corporate structure and the oppression of the capitalistic industries is insidious. We need to get back to the roots, free the weed.
Yeah, I think we need to rewrite the Constitution and focus on individual rights and lessen the power of government and corporations. But that's one of the reasons they came and took me out economically back in 2016, which is another story we won't go into right now. We are almost out of time. Martin, is there anything you would like to say in closing? I know you've got your new book, Flower Rises, Flower Rises, and then New Prescription. Is that your other book?
That's an older book. It's still in print, but this is my story of Flower Rises. And that title comes from a Buddhist line, a flower rises from the mud. And I feel this is an example of cannabis, which is coming from such difficulty, but the flower will rise. There's no stopping a good thing, We need it. It's a part of our lives and our history and our biology to this day. And it's not going away. Cannabis is more popular than ever. More than 50% of Americans now have tried cannabis. And as you said, None of them died.
That's right. Those are the ones that are willing to admit it to an anonymous pollster, right? So some people want to stay, a lot of people want to stay in the closet, but there are more marijuana smokers than there are Christians and Jews combined. You
Uh,
know, we're the largest group in the world. We just haven't exercised our full power, and when we do, it can change the political structure of the world. And we need it to happen. We need hemp for building materials and paper. We need hemp for food. We need hemp for medicine and for fun too. So that's what I've been about. When I first went to my first pro marijuana event back when, just a week after my 18th birthday in 1978, the White House smoke-in, organized by the Yippies. Little did I know that here, 50 years later, we'd still be fighting this fight. And we've had some victories, you know. People are not going to jail for simple possession of marijuana anymore,
oh, but
which
you
is
know,
a big,
a quarter Mexicans were arrested for marijuana last year,
yeah,
2022. Over 250,000. And it's legal in many states.
yeah.
Something
I
wrong.
don't tell me while I was petitioning to legalize marijuana here in Oregon that we'll never legalize marijuana, and it wasn't going to happen in our lifetime. Well, it started to happen, but this overregulation and what they call the industrialization is something that we still have to work to resolve.
I'm
So
so glad to know that you are out there as supporting the individual rights that we all deserve and should be able to enjoy in this country. Freedom, right? This is.
that
I have a line I like to repeat. We have the
please
right to remain free. We have the
tell
right to
me.
remain free.
So you have the website aflowerrises.com.
Correct.
Your other website is MMMJWA.com. Tell us about that website briefly.
Well, my mmj.com website is covering a lot of topics related to Lifeline with the medicine and some studies. And you can find a copy of the new prescription marijuana as medicine, which is a comprehensive review of scientific studies for cannabis. I posted that for free online. Flowerrises.com is contains everything about my new book, which is a dramatic, entertaining piece of literature, which I hope some people will enjoy.
All right. Well, we've had Martin Martinez with Lifeline and longtime medical marijuana activist. I want to thank you for coming on the show, Martin. It's good to see you again. I look forward to seeing you and keep working to restore hemp.
You too.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Martin.
Have a
Good night.
great day.